Hi class, this is Eric Hill and I'm going to be giving my presentation on my research topic, which was Boeing and their supplier management failures during the development and launch of the 787. A brief overview of this presentation: I'm going to go over 4 of the OM principles: the design of goods and services, managing quality, process and capacity strategy, and supply chain management. Some of the supplier management related failures of the 787 had to do with the design, both in terms of the engineering design as well as the design for manufacturing. In other words, some of the issues were caused by the decision to implement such a new and large-scale use of composites in their aircraft design. While that was a cutting-edge design, it almost certainly aided in their delays due to the company's inexperience with composites. Additionally, Boeing designed the aircraft to be built by a wide assortment of vendors and not internally. The goal there was to reduce the overall investment cost for Boeing while gaining potential customers from supporting nations, such as Japan or Italy. Boeing suppliers actually helped cover the developmental cost by paying for the initial R&D cost, but many consider that to be a poor decision by Boeing because the contractors were allowed to own the intellectual property rights of their work, which really added a layer of bureaucracy during design changes. While in theory that sounded like a win-win situation, the poor implementation of their tiered supply chain actually led to additional issues, which often resulted in delays. So with managing quality, it's important to note that Boeing actually outsourced 70% of the work on the 787. So given the number of suppliers and their relatively large statement of work, there was already going to be challenges in managing the quality of the production. And that issue was exacerbated because of the geographical disconnect between pretty much all of the suppliers and Boeing. An unavoidable risk when working with a global supply chain is communications, or a lack thereof. Boeing, in this case, opted to use a computer system to communicate real-time status of its supply chain. However, that system failed, and then the realization hit Boeing that they had to rely less on technology. With process and capacity strategy, Boeing aimed to utilize the tier supplier approach to reduce integration efforts, decrease cycle time, and keep their inventory low. This was an attempt to simulate the Toyota production system and use just-in-time manufacturing principles to keep the inventories low, but at the same time have the operations be lean enough to handle a large capacity. By utilizing a tiered supplier approach, Boeing was hoping to reduce its overall integration efforts by having the majority of the work be performed by its Tier 1 suppliers. And again, the end goal here was to reduce the cycle time for final assembly in Everett, Washington. The dream of the Dreamliner was that the suppliers would do all the work and it would simply snap together with a few major sections to complete the build. The overall theme of Boeing's failures with the 787 are, in fact, supply chain related. So supply chain management was a main talking point, but it could be broken down further into some of the previously mentioned categories. But ultimately, poor planning led to the delays and budget failures. The choice of vendors also led to conflicting engineering data and again, delays. And frankly, Boeing underestimated how much vendor support they would need to provide to its suppliers. So, in essence, Boeing's overall decision to outsource so much work led to a domino effect of supply chain failures. Vendor selection proved to be a challenge because the majority of the vendors were simply inexperienced in aerospace manufacturing. But Boeing didn't really account for that until the issues were highly visible, thus leading to the overall assumption that Boeing underestimated how much support they would need to provide. For example, Boeing had to provide so much support to Vought Aircraft Industries, which was a Tier 1 supplier, that they actually bought them and took over the operation. Overlooking risks such as these display a clear failure in Boeing's supply chain management. In fact, the chairman and CEO of Boeing during the time of the 787 was Jim McNerney, and he was quoted at an investor conference stating, "We wouldn't do it exactly the same way." And of course, here he was referring to the wide range of decisions that ultimately doomed the schedule of the 787, but at least the company recognized their failures, and the program is in a much healthier state than it was during the development. So in conclusion, Boeing failed in effectively executing several of the operation management principles outlined and described in the course text and mentioned in this presentation. The main reason for categorizing this presentation as Boeing's supplier management failures is simply because the project was so heavily outsourced and so global. While the individual topics such as design of services and goods and managing quality aren't definitively related to supplier management, in the case of the 787 Dreamliner, they are. The bottom line is that Boeing did not effectively plan ahead for the design, development, and integration of the 787 program into its portfolio, hence why the initial delivery was delayed by nearly 3 years and widely over budget. And again, to close, the quote from Jim McNerney himself says it all. We wouldn't do it exactly the same way, speaking in regards, of course, to the company's approach to the 787. And here are some of the references that I used for this presentation, primarily for graphics, and the other sources mentioned are for the research that I used during my paper. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you, and bye.